Hey guys, this is Brad from Blue Nile Farm. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the chain harrow and whether it's a worthwhile piece of equipment for your arsenal. You know, a lot of times when you're a small farmer, you want to be really smart about buying the right tools and what are their applications and if they're worth, the investment. So we're going to break all this down today and decide whether this chain harrow is worth something for your operation. So stay tuned. So first, let's talk about the chain harrow itself. And what I'm talking about is not a homemade drag system. I'm talking about something that's designed and made as a chain harrow. And chain harrows themselves aren't, a lot of times you'll see them, they're stuff you buy at a box store. They're very small and a lot of guys drive around and utilize them in an ATV. I don't want to talk about that little category because it doesn't really apply more on the farming end of it. I want to talk about a real chain harrow, one that's made in a box frame that you can actually pick up and move around and go field to field or take it down the road. It can even have a set of wheels. You know, something that's a heavy duty unit that when you get it in the field, you know you're really dragging something and you're getting the job done. You know, unfortunately, it's not like dragging a piece of fence. You know, this thing actually has a lot of purposes and we're going to discuss that. But, you know, when you make and you get a chain harrow, you want to get one that's the most universal possible and one that's relatively heavy duty. So I suggest you buy a heavy duty unit. Now this harrow behind me is made by Wingfield Harrows and they're made out of Illinois. And there's a lot of companies that do this, but I'm kind of promoting them because that's what this actually is. And I kind of think that, you know, there's a lot of advantages to buy something, you know, US made for one, and number two is I like the concepts because with the Wingfield Harrow, you could buy just the 10-foot box or even smaller sizes. You know, they come in all different sizes, so you need to check them out, but they actually have a frame that you can hook up to a 3-point, and that means you can move it around. Then you have options of adding wings or adding tires to the wings, so you can easier for you to transport. You don't have to worry about a 3-point lift system. So there's a lot of different ways, but there's ways you can expand. And when it comes down to cost, you can spend as little as a couple $1,000s to maybe almost $4,000 just for a 10-foot frame. Then maybe $5,000 to add on the wings, and that makes you go from a 10-footer to a 20-footer. You can actually add on wheels for another $4,000, so you're at $15,000. So then you have pretty much a cart system where you can drive it around. It has a tongue and it lifts and lowers with hydraulics. You can get a real big system up to $26,000 if you're looking at a 50-footer. So what I'm trying to tell you is that there's a lot of different sizes and it's not one size fits all. But we're not talking about the tiny little ones that you buy out of a box store. The nice thing about these units is that there's no moving parts. The only real moving parts are the tines, and that's the wear piece. So let's go look at the tines for a second and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about and how they actually work. So these are basically the tines, and I don't know if you get a good look, but they run through the ground. And they're like set up as a V, and they're either set as what you define as aggressive setting, where there's pressure there and they kind of drag through the ground, kind of like dragging your finger this way across the field, and they actually stick up, or they drag smooth and flat, kind of like this, and they're not going to be as aggressive, not going to get as much bite. To me personally, I think aggressive is the best option. And the reason for that is one, these are big harrows. So to switch around and to change their direction is a lot of work. Number two is I think you're going to get more bang for your dollar aggressively because of all the multiple factors and things you can do with that, which we're going to talk about next. But from something that's a cost effective unit, you know, like I say, for $4,000 buying something brand spanking new for a tool that you can use and expand over time if you like it, is a reasonable opportunity that you should look at closely. So let's continue on and let's talk about different applications we could use this chain harrow for. So when it comes down to operating costs, the only thing you really have to pay out for is fuel. And that's pretty much it. And if you have like wings on this and you're covering a lot more footage, you know, the amount of fuel that you're going to go through is not that much. Secondly, there is really, the only wear parts are going to be in the tines. And as Dean Wingfield, the owner of Wingfield Harrow, told me that, you know, once those tines start to get worn down, just sell this unit and go buy another one. And, you know, somebody will buy it and you're just going to recycle and get a newer unit. you know, and it's only going to wear down by how much you use it. I've had this thing for about 7 years, and I still have plenty of years to go with it. So it really works out real well. I can leave it outside. It's really not going to rot or get real rusty if you choose to, just because it's all steel. And it's really a relatively easy unit to maintain. And other than a bolt falling off or a clip falling off and I'm losing a chain, or maybe you need to weld something, and I haven't had to do any of the welding part, but overall I've had no problem with this at all, and really there's no maintenance to it. Once it's hooked and once it's together, you're off and running, and you should have no problems for many years. Very simple, easy piece of equipment, and you really have no breakdowns. So your costs are very, very, very small other than your initial investment. So when it comes down to applications, where can I use this chain here? Where can I make my money with it to get the return on my investment? Well, we're going to cover that right now because that's what everybody's kind of eager to hear. And traditionally, most people think, hey, I just buy a chain harrow so I can spread manure in my fields. And that's correct. It's a great tool. And almost in my mind, if I can go buy another tractor, which I haven't done yet, I would like to designate that tractor all summer and fall just to be handling the chain harrow, because there's so many applications for a chain harrow throughout the summer and fall period of time that it's, for me, because I live in northeastern Ohio, because spring it's too wet and in winter it's just snow, I just think it's better off to be used constantly because there's so many different reasons. So that is correct. I own a horse farm. I have like 20 horses. So as the horses go out in the pastures, they obviously defecate throughout certain areas of the pasture. I can take this chain harrow and spread that manure almost on a weekly basis and reduce my fly problem, and also refertilize my pastures and break that manure down quicker. So that's the #1 benefit. So if you're a cattle person, you should do this, because you know, the whole thing with managing your manure problems is basically the ability to spread that manure to increase growth in your field and reduce and make your animals eat in more areas than just one. You know, the old adage, don't shit where you eat. Part of the problem is the more you spread that manure, you can get them to go over that area and start eating. But you got to maintain it and spread that out on a regular basis, and eventually animals will have a better grazing area, and you're reducing your manure problems and your fly problems in your field. Secondly, where I think a chain harrow is really important is, and what I'm doing currently is I run hay fields, and in my hay fields you have dead grass and thatch that needs to be pulled up all the time. So once or twice a year, depending on the fields, I run the chain harrow through and I remove the thatch, and it's a huge difference for me. Also, if I want to overseed a field, if I have a broadcast seeder, whether I'm doing a hay field or a pasture, you know, you run your chain harrow through the field first, and then you spread your seed, and you go back through it again with the chain harrow to incorporate that seed to get seed to soil contact. It's a big, huge deal, and it'll save you a lot of time. Another thing that I use a chain harrow for, and it's probably a key piece of equipment, and without it you can't do this, and this is where this tool shines, is leveling off rough fields and pastures. If you got a field or pasture that's so rough you can't even drive over it, and it's causing you lots of maintenance bills because you're breaking down all the time because the fields are so rough. You know, in my hay operation, that's my biggest loss per year are breakdowns, and the breakdowns are all related, probably better than 75%, to rough fields. So I've done other videos on this, and it's about basically removing the rough spots out of your hay fields, and the chain harrow is the finishing tool that can be able to go through the field and level those spots out, and it's vital. So there's a key component that's almost a gear. That's probably the only tool you can use, really, in my opinion, to really level out a field after you kind of work it up a little bit and to smooth out your bumps. Another tool that it's used for is creating seed beds even on dirt, you know, because what they do is they break up the clods real well, and it really makes a fine, smooth surface. And if you're out, have a disc or something, or a finishing tool that basically leaves ridges and people complain about that, this tool will come through and basically replace, in my opinion, a cola mulcher. It may not have a roller, but what it does is it pulls and drags that weight. It actually just compresses that soil a little bit, and it creates a firmer bed, and it breaks up all your clods, and nothing gets stuck up under here. You know, especially in dirt, it just kind of drags it through, and it does a great job. So that's another alternative for it. Another big money saver, because we're all looking at saving money, is in lime and in fertilizer, and the cost that you could save with lime and fertilizer, incorporating this in your system. You know, because throughout the time, lime and fertilizer, a lot of times people apply it, but they don't go back over it and try to get it worked into the soil immediately. They just think that I'll wait till the rain comes, and basically you're losing a lot of money. And I'll show you some charts here about how you're losing money if you don't incorporate your fertilizer or your lime relatively quickly once you start putting it down into the field. It'll save you money, and it's a money saver, not a money blower, and that's another tool for this. So this chart just basically shows if you're putting down nitrogen, if you don't incorporate it at all into the field, you're going to lose about 50% of it. If you get rain, and that's what you're waiting for, the rain may incorporate 80%. But if you chain harrow it, you're going to get about 90% contact to the soil. Now we're talking about cost. When you incorporate fertilizer, you're saving about $25 on that per acre. And if you incorporate lime, you're looking at $10 savings per acre. Together between lime and fertilizer, that's a $35 savings per acre just by incorporating. There's other areas that you can use this for. If you have a sandy area, this would work out good. Say you have a riding arena, or maybe an area that you want groomed so people can ride or walk. You know, this is great. You know, I have paddocks right now with animals and horses that are out there. It's a dry lot. You know, and if it gets kind of built up, a lot of times they use wood chips as a way of kind of keeping the mud off the animal's feet. I would take this chain harrow through. Not only does it break up the manure, but again, it smooths out all the wood chips and makes a nice pad. So anything that you need to level and smooth, especially anything that relates to dirt or something that's a loose material, this will work for you. Even gravel, to some degree, it'll work. I don't think a chain harrow is worth the squat on the gravel driveway. That's my personal opinion. So if you're buying it for a gravel driveway, that's a big mistake. If you have a smaller unit and you're making trails, you know, in the woods, or maybe you're having wood chip trails, again, perfect for that too. Anything that needs to be leveled, that's loose material, this will work for. And I think that you can't beat it for the costs and the savings, because the investment's small. And the applications are great. And that's one thing that makes this different from a lot of other tools that are on the market. So when it comes down to time management, when it comes down to being cost effective, when it comes down to getting a return on your investment, I have to honestly say, in my opinion, that the chain harrow does all that and more. And what's nice is, like I said, you can start off with a 10-foot unit, which is what I did, and I invested $4,000 or so. And then after the first year, I decided, hey, I can double my width, and I added another 10 foot. So now, by adding the wings was another $5,000. So say for $9,000 or $10,000, now I have a 20-foot piece of equipment that I can cover a lot of ground quickly, that can do many different things. And what it excels at is finishing work. And that's what I use it for, is to finish off fields, to get prepared for seeding, for the fertilizer. You know, it all comes down to being used for something to give me a return on my investment. And you cannot go wrong with the tool that you will actually use, because there's a lot of farm tools that you'll buy. So, and I'll just pick a plow, for example. If you're not plowing the ground, it's going to sit until you decide to plow another field. You know, for a lot of people, a hay baler is exactly what it does. It bales hay. And if it's not baling hay, it's sitting in the shed. Hay rake, if it's not raking hay to be baled, it's sitting in the shed. So you may use these tools depending on how many fields you actually do, maybe 4 or 5 times a year, maybe less. You know, some people more, depending on how many acres you have. But this tool can be used many times over. It all depends on your willingness to get on the tractor, fill it up with fuel, and put it and incorporate it into your program. Because in the end, if you do it on a regular basis, it can only do is make you money and cost you very little. And you can probably pick up a used chain harrow from somewhere on the market, but be prepared. You got to make sure that you got enough time so you can utilize it. Because if you buy one and a guy wore it down too far, it's not going to be that effective for you. It's not going to give you your return on your investment as much as you'd like, because it's not performing like it should. I was told basically before, and I've said it, prior, if when you're done with the tool, you sell it and you get a new one. And this is one of those tools that, you know, getting new is not a bad thing. And I think it's a very cost-effective tool to have. Plus you get a nice little tax write-off too, so it's a win. Hey guys, thanks for watching that video on the chain harrow. I wanted to wrap it up now because I think I kind of covered the main things. If you watch my channel, you'll see I have a playlist on the chain harrow, and I cover all these aspects that we're talking about and how this thing is to be used. And I wanted just to let everybody know that a chain harrow has a lot of value. I think it's a forgotten tool that a lot of guys don't use it. And just because your neighbor doesn't have it doesn't mean you shouldn't own one, because it will give you some yield on your investment. I think it's a good tool to have if you're doing hay, livestock, you know, working fields. You can't go wrong because it's a cheap investment. And it's a tool that'll last you a long time with very little wear. So all a very good positive thing to have. Check them out. Check out Wingfield Harrows. They can do you so much good. You just got to give them a chance. Put them on a tractor. Get out there and see the results for yourself. It's money in the bank if you use it when you do fertilizing and lime. And you know, it's almost, you cannot fix a rut in a pasture or hayfield without a chain harrow. And I can't even give you enough reasons why you would not want to own one of these, because it's almost silly and poor management not to own one, in my opinion. So with that said, thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you guys soon.